Yeah, I mean, look, I don't want to say it happens almost never. Jurors probably violate their oath more times than we'd like to discuss, right?
Really?
Because in every criminal case, right, the judge will issue instructions and say, you cannot talk to anybody about this case.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a juror sitting on a months-long murder case, what are the chances that won't happen? We all hope it doesn't. But, chances are probably more likely than not. The question then becomes whether or not and to what extent do you punish a juror for doing that?
Yeah.
And that becomes dicey, right? Because we want people to serve on juries. We want people to want to serve on juries. We already have a system here in this country where nobody wants to serve on a jury and everybody tries to get out of it in every way they can. And so the last thing you want to do is, on top of all the other stuff, right, taking people away from their jobs and their families and so on and so forth, you want to essentially have them serve under threat, which is essentially the case, right? You do, because they have an oath and you can't violate that oath.
Mm-hmm.
And so, do we punish jurors too much for that? I would imagine it depends on the motive. If somebody's doing it to help a grieving parent, that's one thing. If somebody's doing it to sell information or, for more perhaps sinister purposes, then that's a different story. So it probably happens, unfortunately, more often than we'd like to discuss.
So what can this mean for the future of the case? Because the defendant's already trying to get the grand jury indictment thrown out. Is this going to give him the grounds to get that thrown out?
Probably not.
You don't think so?
I don't think it'll get him the grounds to throw it out, absent more information. We'd have to know more about the grand jury. I don't think that if you take this one isolated occurrence, that's enough to dismiss an indictment. Because you'd have to dismiss it on certain grounds and have to show certain things. So I don't think it'd be enough. But it would depend on what else happened there, the degree to which that juror or maybe others had an influence that was improper on the jury, and so on and so forth. So that's a tough one on the moment.
Right. Like Mike Sanner just said, decision by the grand jury was made before the leak. Does that matter?
Well, but that's not the issue, right? The issue is that the lawyers will argue, I presume, is that if this juror was willing to do this, what else happened, right? If this juror is apt to not, adhere to that juror's oath, what else could that juror have done? And then you get into speculation and other things. From what you're telling me, it doesn't strike me as enough to get an indictment dismissed, but who knows?
Do you think that it could, like the defense could go deeper into investigating this person and possibly interview the grand juror?
They would have to make a showing. They would have to make a showing as to whether or not that's necessary. Right? You'd also have to presumably stop the case while this is all happening, because
that's my next question. Would the judge call everybody in and say, all right, we need to talk about this?
Again, that would depend, right? It would depend on how easily accessible the members of the grand jury are and how fast that process can get done, because there are a whole bunch of questions that come into play, including speedy trial, right? The defendant can't just sit around waiting for this trial to come to an end. There are constitutional rights there. So it can get real messy. But the first thing that has to happen is the defense has to show a real connection between a taint and this act. And whether or not and the degree to which they could do that is what will impact this decision.
Okay, so let me give you another scenario and imagine this being your client. Okay. You have this guy who's accused of these 4 murders, right? And then you have this dad who has hit between him and his daughter, which is in the middle. Those two in the beginning felt like police were not giving them enough info. So they took it upon themselves to do their own investigating. I don't know if you've ever seen a family do this in a case, but we've seen it and we've seen it hard. So now we've found out, allegedly, he denies all of this, but he went door to door in the neighborhood to try to find information. There was audio leaked early on from a Ring doorbell of a neighbor. We just have him, digging into things online, getting tips from prisoners that ended up being false. all these fake videos coming into him showing a white Elantra. Turns out he had it analyzed. It was a false video. So we've got internet people sending this father, just tons of information, and he's deciphering through it, and they're trying to figure it out on their own because the police were so tight-lipped. So now with this grand juror leak on top of everything else, do you think that that could hinder the case at all at this point?
No.
No.
No, look, parents, anybody can do whatever they want to look into any case they want, as long as they don't break the law, right? Obviously, once you start messing around with jurors and things like that, that's a big deal. Once you
Mhm.
start finagling with the evidence, once you start impacting prosecutors and the administration of justice, as they say, that's a different story. You now cross the line, and now you can suffer real penalties. But anybody can do whatever they want to investigate a criminal case. That's the short answer. Just don't break the law when you do it.
Okay, so that brings me to my next happening in this case. So allegedly they have a secret witness, an informant that they've kept under wraps, and the dad found out who it was, and he set up a meeting with this person, and he was about to meet with them. Now this is where I want to get your opinion, because it's been said that the dad's lawyer received a letter from the FBI saying quit meddling with the witnesses. Does that sound like something the FBI would do, send a letter to his lawyer?
No, but
No.
the content of the letter isn't wrong, right? That's witness tampering, and you can get in a whole lot of trouble for witness tampering. I presume the person, the dad here, wasn't just doing this for investigatory purposes. He was probably trying to get information or do something.
He
You got to,
wants to know why.
yeah,
He
yeah.
wants to know why this happened.
Yeah, you got to be real careful when you do that. You got to be real careful in any criminal case, right? One thing that I tell my clients always is don't mess with the witnesses. Don't go and talk to them. Don't meet with them. Don't text them. Don't reach out and try to see what they're going to say or who they said what to. Because you don't want more charges. You don't want more stuff, right? The last thing this
Right.
dad wants is, on top of all the other god awful things that he's going through, to add this, right?
Yeah.
And so, in terms of the FBI, this is a state case, not a federal case. I don't know about that. Although I suppose anything is possible. I mean, perhaps there are some interstate issues. I don't know. It's possible the FBI would get involved, but
I just wondered if a letter would be their means of communication about something like that.
not really. FBI typically makes itself known in other ways. But the content is certainly true, and this guy should get a lawyer and stop doing all these things.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, they did further the gag order at one point. So they had they had the dissemination order. Then they expanded it to the lawyers of the victims' families. So I think that, a lot of this they knew was going on, and they were trying to shut him down, and then he was getting more frustrated. So it was kind of like a push pull type of thing. I just wondered if this could have any effect on the case. I mean, if he didn't meet with the confidential informant, then he's okay. He didn't do anything wrong. I
Well,
mean, he's pushing it,
but
right?
he did reach out. He did try to make contact, right?
Yeah, but he had to have found out who he was somehow. That's the thing. Someone must be leaking.
That's a different story. Maybe there are other people that are responsible for this stuff here that have their own issues with
What
the
do
law.
they do with that in a high profile case like this? Do they just kind of ignore the stuff that really, I mean,
Well, when you say what do they do, who does to whom? Depending.
the court, like how does the court handle leaks and stuff like that?
If there is a leak of information that otherwise could not be responsible to anybody other than the people involved in the case, right? Because there's certain confidential information, sensitive information that only lawyers are privy to. Sometimes not even defense lawyers. Sometimes it's just prosecutors. What the judge would typically do at first glance is get on the record and be very stern and say, guys, I don't know what's happening. Something is coming out of somewhere, I think. Um, you all know what you have to do, what you can do, what you can't do. Don't make me make this inquiry a deeper inquiry. And if this happens again, then it becomes a lot more detailed. And
Would that be done
obviously,
behind the scenes?
it can be, but a judge would typically put that on the record, so nobody could say that we didn't know or we didn't,
You didn't
And
address it.
yeah, and if there is somebody in question, if they know or presume or suspect who may have done it, then the judge may take a closer look at that person, and it becomes a bit more detailed. So that's how the judge would generally deal with it.
Got you. Got you. Okay. So that kind of explains. I just didn't know what would happen next. If this was true that the grand juror leaked something, would we for sure see the judge pull everybody into the courtroom to kind of sort through it, or maybe not?
Not for sure, but
Not
it's a possibility.
necessarily.
It's a possibility. It's tough to do in these kinds of cases, right?
Yeah.
Because you want the case to move, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for clarifying that. I know this stuff gets so confusing for
Hey,
us. And
no,
there's a lot going on at once. So the final thing, and I just want to say right here, I want to just preface and or not preface, but wrap that up by saying I feel for Steve, the dad in this case. I can't imagine the hell he's going through